The colonial and young nation periods lasted from 1770 to 1890. During this time period, the Revolutionary War took place, which won the United States its independence from Britain. The Philadelphia Bible Riots of 1843 took place, which ended in 13 deaths and a Catholic church being burned. And lastly, the Civil War took place, which ended in the abolishment of slavery. This was the time period where Americans were just getting started on their own, so it was a bit of a confusing time period for them. The people worked to get an education system established, and the biggest focus in this period was achieving equality. In the beginning of this time period, before the Revolutionary War, the only schools required by law to be built were in the larger towns of New England. School was not free, so only the privileged could send their children to school, and very few went to college. African American slaves in the South were not allowed to receive any education. The African Americans in the North could only attend segregated schools which were in poor conditions. In 1855, a law was passed abolishing segregation in schools in Massachusetts. The end of the Civil War in 1865 set the slaves free, but still all attended poor, segregated schools until 1896, when a law was passed abolishing segregation in all schools in the country. By 1890, the end of the movement, the United States was providing more schooling to more children than any other nation thanks to universal education. Before universal education started, parents would often pay to send their youngest children to a dame school. Similar to daycare, children were taught letters and discipline. Older boys who were able to continue their education went to grammar school where they were taught mathematics, Latin, and philosophy. Girls were often only put through 3 years of schooling. School was meant to prepare students to take the place of their parents. Education was meant to enable men to judge for himself what will secure or endanger his freedom. Classrooms were filled with students of all ages, and material was often inadequate. By the end of this movement, students were taught much more, including physiology, health and hygiene, biology, and even zoology. Women were going to colleges to become educated and later become teachers. Horace Mann was a politician who was made the first Secretary of Education. Although this position held no actual power, he was an influential person in this movement towards universal education. Mann visited schools and noted the poor conditions and proposed the idea of common schools. Common schools would teach a common body of knowledge that would give all students equal education and equal chance of life. They would be funded with taxes so they could be free to all children, rich and poor. Mann came up with the standardized schools with standardized textbooks, blackboards, and chairs with backs to be in all classrooms. The standardization of schools started during this time period. Largely, I believe it was a good thing, especially during a time period where there was absolutely no standards for the conditions of the school or information taught. In the modern period, specifically the 80s and 90s, the push for high academic standards was at its height. However, many vouch for the progressive school approach where the students are taught to master critical thinking skills instead of a set, standardized knowledge. Regardless of how you feel about standardization in schools, the colonial and young nations period was an incredibly important time period for the American school system. It set up the base for what the educational system is today.